Welkom bij de MarketingOost Symposium Week. En wat fijn dat u in grote getalen weer deelneemt. En ik vind het helemaal fijn omdat het zo'n bijzondere tijd is. 2020 is een gek jaar, daar hoef ik u niks meer over te vertellen. En daarom ben ik wel heel blij dat we nu bij elkaar zijn en deze week een digitale setting hebben om met elkaar te praten over de ontwikkelingen in Overijssel. De afgelopen periode ben ik positief verrast door alle creativiteit die is ontstaan. De inspiratie die ondernemers naar elkaar hebben gegeven, de mooie ideeën, de nieuwe ontwikkelingen en dat in deze moeilijke tijden. Het thema van deze MarketingOost Symposium Week is bewuste bestemmingen, omdenken in tijden van corona. U kunt van ons in deze week veel inspiratie verwachten. Kennisdeling, creativiteit, binnen- en buitenlandse gastsprekers, maar ook een kijkje nemen in de keuken van ondernemers die u graag laten zien welke creatieve oplossingen ze hebben gevonden in deze moeilijke coronatijden. Daarnaast hebben wij als MarketingOost dit jaar gereflecteerd op onze eigen organisatie en daar is een nieuw meerjarenplan uit voortgekomen. De vrije tijdseconomie is een sector van groot economisch belang. En wij zien vrije tijdseconomie niet als doel, maar als middel om Overijssel verder te ontwikkelen en bij te dragen aan maatschappelijke opgaves. Dat meerjarenplan gaat in op de manier hoe we vanuit data en onderzoek en inzichten ondernemers kunnen helpen bij het ontwikkelen van aanbod, overheden en ondernemers kunnen helpen bij het ontwikkelen van gebiedsvisies. En daarnaast gaan we natuurlijk het hele mooie aanbod wat we in deze provincie hebben graag regionaal, nationaal en internationaal opnieuw onder de aandacht brengen en vermarkten. We willen dat niet alleen bezoekers, maar ook bewoners en bedrijven aangenaam verrast zijn door alles wat Overijssel hun te bieden heeft. En dat komt allemaal samen in de MarketingOost Symposium Week. Ik wens u een hele inspirerende week toe.
Ik ben bij De Lutte en achter mij zie je het Twentse Stonehenge. En dit hier, dat staat eigenlijk symbool voor een heel prachtig event genaamd Culitour Twente. En degene die daar alles van weet, die komt hier ronkend binnengereden.
Hallo André.
Harold. Wat prachtig hier.
Het kon slechter, zeggen ze in Twente.
Zo, jongen, zo prachtig naast jou. Bloemenbeek, perfect.
Dank je.
Culitour Twente, wat is het?
Culitour Twente is natuurlijk een prachtige tour langs de Twentse toprestaurants. 12 toprestaurants in Twente die samen hebben gewerkt met de mooiste gerechten. Takeaway, want het was in coronatijd, we mochten niet de gasten ontvangen. En nu hebben we dat gecombineerd met een prachtige autotour, fietstour door Twente heen. Prachtige Twentse land om te kunnen picknicken.
Dit soort gerechtjes, wat is het?
Ja, dit is een takeaway gerecht van een prachtig stukje boerderij-eend. Heerlijk gegaard, lage temperaturen met wat biet en ook gelakt met onder andere honing en stroop. En de honing komt van eigen imkerij.
Op een gegeven moment komt corona, jij hebt een gigantisch mooi bedrijf en de boel staat stil. Wat doet dat met jou?
Nou, best veel als mens en als leider, als ondernemer. Je kunt het eigenlijk niet bevatten en je voelt je op een gegeven moment ook best eenzaam. Want dan merk je dat je als ondernemer wordt je geacht allerlei beslissingen te nemen. Op een kompas, zoals Rutte het al zei, die je helemaal eigenlijk niet hebt. Je kijkt in de mist.
Op een gegeven moment heb jij je herpakt, komen dit soort mooie initiatieven. Wat heb je verder gedaan?
Toen wij half mei, begin mei hoorden dat we weer open mochten als hotels, hebben we ook meteen de kansen aangegrepen met een heel bijzonder concept. We hebben een echte buitenkeuken gecreëerd en daar konden we onze restauranttafels neerzetten in de buitenlucht, onder de platanen, heel lommerrijk. En dat heeft fantastisch de hele zomer gefunctioneerd natuurlijk. We hadden het geluk dat we ook een Twente culinair hadden opgericht, al een paar jaar daarvoor. Dat is een samenwerkingsverband van de 12 beste restaurants van Twente. En vanuit die optiek konden wij ook samenwerken en heel snel schakelen met elkaar. Samen met MarketingOost, Gastvrij Twente, om proberen zo snel mogelijk een goede promotie te maken en Twente op de kaart te zetten. En al die partijen zorgden ervoor dat je goed geïnformeerd bleef en dat je ook bijvoorbeeld in de ondersteuning op weg naar subsidie voor de provincie, want die loofde ook die heeft toezegging gedaan om wat extra te ondersteunen bij dat soort initiatieven waar echt werd samengewerkt. Daar hebben zij een actieve rol in gespeeld. Al moet ik zeggen, de echte afwikkeling moet nog plaatsvinden, maar daar ga ik vanuit dat het goed komt nog.
Maar dit spektakel, ik ga even naar het volgende gerechtje, dat moet natuurlijk doorgaan.
Nou ja, we hebben inderdaad heel veel dingen nu georganiseerd. We hebben dingen klaarstaan. En MarketingOost heeft ook alweer ideeën voor komend jaar om dit te koppelen aan andere zaken. Dus er zijn best wel veel ideeën en plannen.
Wat zou je nou als tip nog mee willen geven aan de ondernemers?
Praat met andere ondernemers, praat ook met andere instituties zoals MarketingOost of Horeca Nederland of de gemeente, mensen die je kent. En maak dingen bespreekbaar, want delen is vermenigvuldigen. Alleen is het gewoon heel moeilijk om dit soort crisis te overleven. Uit iedere crisis komen ook mooie dingen voort en er worden mooie nieuwe verbintenissen gelegd. We zijn allemaal toekomstgericht en daar willen we op toosten.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Mooie woorden.
Hi there, I'm Nick Hall. I'm the founder of the Digital Tourism Think Tank, and I'm really pleased to be part of the MarketingOost Symposium 2020, which of course is held in rather unusual circumstances. We all hope that we can get back to normal life as soon as possible, but for now I'm going to try and inspire you remotely. And today's talk is all about how we can think about the sustainable future of our industry, and ultimately how we can flip our thinking in how we approach the different opportunities that we see in the market. Of course, we can't approach this without also recognizing that as an industry we're faced with many, many challenges right now. But we have to be able to find the strength to look beyond those challenges and think about how we can come back stronger and address some of those core issues that we had difficulty addressing before the pandemic. So let's start out by trying to understand what's actually happened since the pandemic has hit the world and changed absolutely everything. One of the things we can be sure about is that one of the biggest impacts is going to be on consumer behavior. And all of the research and data is already showing a huge shift in how consumers are responding to the current crisis. What it means is that the way in which we live our daily lives has changed dramatically, and there is this huge social impact in the way in which we communicate, the way in which we connect, and the way in which we engage. And what we can see from looking at the data is that more than 80% of consumers actually today feel more connected than they did before the pandemic. And the reason for this? Well, we've spent a lot more time connecting with friends and family online, talking and sharing this really unusual experience that we all find ourselves in, and trying to figure out, what is more important in life when we consider all of the things that we now realize are much more precious to us. One of the most interesting statistics shows that actually more than 88% of consumers today feel that these new connections that they found since the pandemic are connections which are likely to stay with them. They actually value and appreciate those simpler things, family, friendships, and the things that you have around you in your day-to-day lives. So this is something really, really positive. But of course, it means that the motivations, the things that drive us, the things we want to do, go out, experience, and buy, are all going to be changed as a result. We also see that more than 55% of consumers also recognize the value of family in a much more significant way than they did before. And so the importance and role that family plays in all the opportunities that we can identify as an industry has just become much greater than it ever was before. So I'm going to talk about some of those big trends, and we're going to jump into them and look at how some different brands and businesses and destinations have responded to those trends. And I'm going to start off with the big trend, which is engagement. We see that engagement has seen a dramatic shift. People staying at home, people working from home, means that they connect and they get inspiration in very different ways. We have a lot more time for long-form content, just as one example, whereas before the pandemic, we were focused so much on short-form content because people live out their busy, rushed lives and they don't really have time for anything. So this has been just one example of the big shifts that we see in the digital space. And of course, as an opportunity, we have to respond to that as an industry. Here is an example of Visit Philadelphia, and this is one of our favorite examples because they've somewhat pivoted their thinking, but actually this is something that they were already shifting before the pandemic. They recognized that part of their strength, their identity, and who they are as a destination hinges on the importance of local communities and local people. And so they started this brilliant podcast, which is very raw, and I think you'll really like it if you check it out. It's called Love and Grit, and it's a podcast that's actually produced in-house by the team at Visit Philadelphia. Why do we like that? Because actually for many years we've been saying you've got to produce your own creative identity. You can't outsource that to agencies. It's something that you need to take control of because only you know what's in the DNA of your story. And so they've taken control of the story of the city, and they've created this brilliant podcast which runs on a weekly basis, and it allows them to highlight and feature different ambassadors who can tell that local story in a way that's more authentic than any agency could ever do that. And it's also about creating those connections and creating those stories. There's so many examples of this. I don't have time to show all of them to you, but another example we love here is Visit Tampere in Finland. They've done exactly the same thing, and actually what they told us was one of the biggest values that came out of it was actually using the medium of a podcast and telling those stories to actually create those connections with businesses, with partners, with their network. And those connections are so much more valuable than they realized before doing that. Another example, if we think about the difficulty of having closed borders and having perhaps a lot of long-haul visitors that just can't visit us right now, is Tourism Australia. We love their work. They're always one of the best destinations when it comes to social and digital. And they've actually done something I really love, which isn't on the screen here, called Australia in 8D. They're hyper inspirational and really immersive pieces of video content which sit on their IGTV channel. And if you have an opportunity to check it out, I definitely recommend you do that, but with some headphones, because it's a great experience. But this is live from Australia, and it's an initiative that they put out in the midst of the pandemic because they realized that the Australian borders were going to be closed for some time. And of course, Australia is heavily dependent on international and global visitors. So those long-haul markets are some of the markets most impacted. But rather than shy away or just shut down, they decided, let's actually engage those audiences, because that idea, that inspiration to travel to Australia isn't something that's going to go away in 6 months or a year. It's something that's part of building a brand. And so they connected with ambassadors all around Australia to create a Facebook Live festival, if you like, where they could connect everybody to share different nuances on the brand of Australia. And it's just a great example of using creativity and some of the digital tools that actually we have at arm's length. And it doesn't necessarily always require a huge technical implementation of that. Now, another big shift is the move towards learn content. That is, learn at home, learn from YouTube, learn from TikTok. Actually, this is one of the biggest shifts that we certainly don't think is going to go back. It's a kind of sense of using social media in a more purposeful and more value-added way. And TikTok is perhaps a surprising channel in this respect, because I think TikTok has a lot of preconceptions that many of us have, especially people like myself who work in digital marketing. You know, we didn't necessarily take it seriously at first, but TikTok have actually reached out to their creators and asked them to create tutorial content, to get behind causes, and to really use TikTok as a channel which can create a sense of common good, create a sense of purpose. And this is just an example of 4 different channels which have all been set up by different creators with the aim of teaching and showing different ways of doing things and asking their audiences to follow along and replicate that. So it's an interesting wave in how young people are now following people, but actually to learn and better themselves online. Another example, of course, YouTube. YouTube has seen some really big shifts in how people have used the platform. And one of the biggest shifts is learning along live. This with me hashtag is something which is really demonstrating how creators are connecting and engaging with their audiences and teaching them how to do things at their homes while they're in lockdown. And it's really showing the opportunity that the public have risen to learn and to develop new skills. Things like sourdough bread or yoga and guided meditation are all trending topics right now. But whilst the main part of the pandemic, where we saw the initial lockdown, has subsided, we still see those trends sticking to a slightly lesser extent. And this is clearly a really valuable opportunity if you're a brand and you're thinking, how do I tap into this? So what's an example of a brand that's done exactly that? Well, South Dakota realized that this was an opportunity. They realized that there's a lot of families that children are staying at home and they have to support them through that curriculum whilst they can't go to school. And so they created a series of online tutorial and lesson videos which help parents teach their children about all of those sort of things that you normally teach children. About wildlife, about nature, about different animal species. And they did that through the lens of South Dakota. What a great idea to tap into that need that parents have to teach their children and that opportunity that a brand has to create really meaningful content that can actually engage with them. And they've done so many other really cool and creative things, and some of them are very low tech but well executed, such as a PDF road trip guide where you can recognize that your customers maybe are traveling much more on road trips than they ever were before, and they're also more likely to be in family bubbles where you need to entertain those families. So creating sketchbooks or road trip guides or crosswords around the destination was just a really simple but very well done execution of tapping into that new opportunity. And connecting is what is really, really interesting, because we see people wanting to have more meaningful connections with the people who are closest to them. And for brands, that's an opportunity to really tap into that need. Well, we all know that there are many restrictions on how we go about our daily lives. And as a business, especially if you have 4 walls and you have a capacity of a certain number of customers, you may find yourselves really struggling right now with reduced capacity and social distancing. There are so many ways we can reimagine, use innovation to think about how to actually work with our customers in a different way, but extend the experience outside of the limitations of the 4 walls within which our business is found. Here's a great example, one of my favorites. It's Secret City Trails. They've been around for some time, and it's basically a web app that does a sort of gamified version of the destination. You can go around, discover different trails, and answer riddles to get clues and responses that take you through a different city one at a time. Now, this is just one example, and there really are so many examples of different web apps and digital tools which can help you get your customers out there and exploring the world around your business. So think about, if you do have that limitation, how can we create an experience which is incredible within the restraints of social distancing, but also think about how we can then extend that experience outside of our 4 walls and still create an amazing customer experience. And maybe there are opportunities to monetize that as well. Here's some of the key trends that we're seeing right now. There's a huge move towards openness. Openness in so many different ways, not only in getting out there and being away from people and enjoying nature, but also openness in what we expect from companies when we think about the values and how they communicate those values to us. As consumers, we have that ability and opportunity to vote with our feet, to choose the brands we want to get behind. And so to be open as a company means to win customers based on your set of values. And this is more and more important than ever before. This is one of our favorite examples here at the DTTT. It's the Opera de l'Estiu in Barcelona. And they realized that they have a community that was in a lot of pain at the start of the pandemic. And they needed to reach out to that community. But at the same time, as a theater, as a cultural venue, they were also suffering and really struggling. So they decided to put on a concert where the attendees could watch online through a virtual experience and purchase seats which were donated to purchase houseplants. And then at the end of that concert, they gave away the houseplants to people who had been there, part of the community, been in the response. And it's a really great way as a business to show that you want to give back, but at the same time you're innovating and creating new experiences. Here are just some examples of some of the movements which are happening online. For Climate, for example, with a hashtag on TikTok, is seeing a huge rise in people creating tutorial videos and how to do something for the climate as a response to that. And these are really big opportunities for tourism businesses and brands to see these conversations happening, to see these as movements and actually be part of them. This is a kind of positive commercial activism, if you like. We also see a lot of businesses and destinations recognizing that United Nations Sustainable Development Goals represent a really big opportunity, but also a priority. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in today's keynote. Transparency is really key, because today, more than ever, customers are expecting brands to show the impact that their activities have on the local community and the local environment. And here's an example of a resort which does exactly that. They produce an annual impact report, which is like an annual report, but showing to an intricate level the transparency on how much money gets reinvested in rebuilding, in sustainability, in purpose, in community values, and actually the positive impact that your spend as a customer will have on the local nature and environment and communities who are really important to the business. This is about attracting a completely new type of customer, but one that is increasingly becoming mainstream. And this is what's really important to recognize if you're a business and you're trying to identify where customer will come from in the future. Another one, which I think I don't need to say, it's probably quite obvious, but what I want to say is differentiate your business by prioritizing safety. We know that safety is important, and we know that we can't compromise when it comes to guest safety. But some businesses have really championed this and made this central to their unique selling points. There are really creative ways to do this. So here's an example of Stella Artois. They created a mural in the Truman Brewery in London, which is a great way of actually showing people that they can circulate and socialize in different social bubbles on the actual mural itself. And it's a great way of getting them to interact with the brand. Now, I'm a huge champion of digital, but I love these kind of things because they're so simple. And actually the opportunity that you can create in digital is to tell that story, to show the world that you have a sense of value, and you can also do something creative as a response to some of the most difficult times we face for ourselves. Sustainability is the overarching theme, and it's one of the most important things that you now need to prioritize in your business. Try to go further. Lean in more. Try to pivot really heavily towards sustainability, because this is where you're going to find the opportunity to win customers in the future. It's not about just doing something good. It's about being driven by something purposeful. And here's a great example of one of the businesses that we love, Purposeful Nomad. They do two things. They engage a community of young female travelers that want to explore the world and do that independently, but they also connect them with other communities around the world where they can have a sense of connection, a sense of giving back, and a sense of meaning. And it's just a really great example of the sort of businesses which are really succeeding these days, because this is where consumer demand is. Consumers want to be part of something positive. But also as a brand, and even as a destination, you can really tap into and respond to this. Here's an example of Helsinki marketing. Now, Helsinki is always one of our favorites. They're a best practice, and they're one of the strongest city marketing organizations that you can find. And they realize that they have a lot of really great sustainable properties on Airbnb, but there's no tag on the Airbnb platform to find sustainable homes. And so they use the opportunity of creating something in digital where they can show those sustainable homes and turning that into a sort of activism PR campaign where they can make a loud statement and obviously talk to and engage those consumers who are most interested in that, whilst at the same time saying, hey, this is what we do, and we're really passionate about this, and sustainability is important for us. Now, before I close, let's look at some of the macro industry trends. Well, people like you and I have probably been used to creating these really inspirational pieces of content that create a sense of a brand. But right now, whilst we see things changing, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we need to work slightly more towards the conversion point of the visitor cycle. And that means working with offers, working with deals, working to reflect the pricing that your domestic and local market is ready to pay, and considering that actually you might need to revisit the product offer and diversify. Here's an example of Newfoundland and Labrador, one of our favorite examples of destinations that create just the most incredible brand. But this 2019 version was right for the pre-pandemic times when people were thinking long-term about how to discover and engage with a destination. In the short term, they had to flip that to the hyperlocal, and they replaced this site with the stay-at-home year of 2020. And this is much more focused on deals and offers and responding to create that sense of a trigger with their customers. We also love that example of South Dakota that I showed earlier. You can see that on the left, it's Road Trip Journal. And then on the right here, we see another destination in the US called Kalamazoo. It's a great example of creating something very simple. It's an online ordering platform, which you can do through their website, to send a loved one a free postcard, which is branded with the destination. Sometimes the simplest things allow you to reach out and create meaningful engagements with your customers. Here's an example of a business that's pivoted and recognized that they can't just have an offline business anymore. Tastemakers Africa have actually moved their business model into a subscription model where they can actually get people subscribing and actually having virtual and hybrid experiences to have those really meaningful connections with those different African cultural connections. That was something that really differentiated them before the pandemic and made them a real trailblazer when it came to creating something fresh and innovative. Here's an example of a series of Michelin star chefs in the UK that came together when their restaurants closed, and they created online Michelin star meal ordering where you can order food that's prepared by them, follow instructions and guides as if you're cooking along with them, and prepare your own Michelin star food at home. Such a great example of recreating that experience. Now, when it comes to differentiating, we also have to understand the things that people are looking for these days. Citizen M Hotels has created a real point of differentiation when it comes to the contactless experience. As you can see on the website here, it says worry-free travel, it's contactless. They realize that this is their unique selling point, and they talk about how contactless exists from the app through to the in-room cleaning, through to the services, through to checkout. You can do the whole hotel experience without having to come into contact with a single human. And whilst that may seem a bit worrying, it's recognizing that that's something that many consumers are now looking for. When it comes to thinking about the future, there are 4 key things that I want to advise you to think about when you consider the opportunities and potentially the risks. First of all, gather insights. Research data is so important, and there's so much of it out there. Just have a look at the Netherlands Board of Tourism and Conventions and you'll already find lots of great data amongst many others. Be ready for uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen next, but one thing we can be sure about is that it's not going to be a smooth path. I'm really sorry to tell you that, but I think you already know that. Think about how to correct errors in your assumptions. We think our customers want that. We think our customers like that. Look at what your sales figures are showing you. Look at how people are responding to content. And most importantly, reach out and ask your customers what they want to see and what they like or appreciate about what you're doing. And lastly, be ready to pivot. And don't forget that pivot might mean pivoting horizontally to other industries and other sectors. And don't be worried to do that. See it as something that's potentially really exciting, a new opportunity, something you haven't done before. Think about how to optimize all the different channels you're using. If you're working with reduced staff costs, you need to really get your game together when it comes to digital. Here's an example of MailChimp on the left and some of the booking tools and apps that you might already be using to work with your customers. Think about how you can automate all the different connections along that journey. Tools like Zapier are really great at connecting different platforms and allowing you to create automations. And whilst I'm not here to tell you about technology in a detailed way, what I can tell you is that this technology is very simple to execute. They all have great tutorial videos, so invest the time in learning that yourself. Don't forget to create an amazing contact-free guest experience. Think about the tools which might help you do that. In the middle here we have a digital queuing system. When you're overcrowded or you're full, you can tell people to go off and queue and come back when they reach the front of the queue on their mobile app. And think about if you have a restaurant, how you can help people to book, reserve, and actually place orders at the table without having to have that physical contact. Lastly, let's look at some of the big shifts that are happening in the visitor cycle. When it comes to awareness, don't forget to do that long-term brand building. It may seem like you have to pivot to local in the short term, but don't forget that your customers are still out there and wanting to come and see you. So create that inspirational content alongside those deals and offers. When it comes to understanding, make stories of the everyday, show what's happening behind the scenes, show how you're pivoting, and be honest with your customers. When it comes to planning, don't forget to give the detail. Help them to see every little detail in the operation and be sure to answer all of their questions, which they certainly will have, as there's a lot of confusion and a lot of difficulties with trust. It's important that you build that trust with your customers. When it comes to booking, don't forget to diversify your sales model. Think about online subscriptions, hybrid offers, and of course, more than anything, think about flexibility in the offer. When it comes to experiencing, think about the use of digital and data to apply consent and actually invite your customers to share their data, so in return, you can give back a more optimal visitor experience, because that's where you're going to find a differentiation. And lastly, when it comes to sharing, don't forget that the sum of what everybody says online is the form of your reputation. So make sure that you really stand out. And if you're doing something great or pivoting, ask your customers to go online and share a review of that, because that's going to be your ambassadors telling other people. Now, solving tourism and the challenges we have is something particularly difficult for us to do. We use a lot of design thinking, and here's just an example of some of the post-pandemic problems we've been working on with some of our network and members. There's a lot of issues, and we need to go through systematic ways of working on solving them and getting to the bottom of them. The destinations which have been doing this for years are going to be the ones that are more resilient to working through and finding their new sense of purpose in today's new normal. Here's an example of Île-de-la-Madeleine in Canada that has been doing just this for many years. They've been working with design thinking to try and solve their core destination problems. If we look before the pandemic, we had problems like seasonality, visitor dispersal, over-tourism, and sustainability. But if we look towards the post-pandemic problems, those still exist, they're expected to return if we go back to normal. But we also have to address things like trust and confidence, economic pressures, barriers in connectivity, safety and capacity. So there's a lot for us to think about. But if I can leave with one message, that is to also look in the long run, look further ahead, look beyond today, because tomorrow we have to also consider how we as an industry can create a sense of positive impact. So look into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and consider, could I make this and solving one or two of these the blueprint of my business, the thing which sets my business apart? Because all the research and the data shows that this is what consumers are looking for. And if you can stand for something as a business, then your customers will find you naturally. And on that note, I want to say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure joining you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Hallo!
Hey André!
Ja, we zijn bij de activiteitenlocatie van de Sallandse Heuvelrug in Nijverdal. De Wilgenweerd. Dat zeg ik goed, hè?
Dat zeg je helemaal goed, André. Welkom.
Wat is dit voor prachtig karretje?
Nou, André, dit is een Kioti en die wordt normaal altijd gebruikt voor de evenementenopbouw. Bijvoorbeeld Douwpop, Zwarte Cross, etc. Maar die is er nu niet.
Nee.
Dus die mensen zaten met die karretjes omhoog en wij maken er graag gebruik van.
Want wat gebeurt er nu mee?
Wij verhuren ze. Dan krijg je een GPS mee en dan krijg je een machtig mooie route hier door het Reggedal en over de Sallandse Heuvelrug.
Het is dus een mooi voorbeeld van een creatief proces in coronatijd.
Ja, dat klopt.
Er moest wat gebeuren.
Er moest wat gebeuren, ja. Ja. Want 2,5 maand stilzitten, elke ondernemer die wil werken, die wil bezig zijn.
Vertel eens, wat kan hier eigenlijk?
Wat kon hier eigenlijk vooral? Dat kan zijn kanovaren, op het water genieten, suppen. Maar dat kan ook zijn in het bos genieten met mountainbiken, met kompastochten, navigatiechallenge. Maar binnen natuurlijk ook, binnen hebben we heel veel mogelijkheden. We hebben 4 escape rooms, waarvan één heel speciale, dat is Beat the Matrix. Dat zijn 10 kamers op zich.
Man, te veel om op te doen wat hier dus allemaal wel niet
Ja,
kon.
en dan heb ik het helemaal nog niet gehad over de vergaderingen en de verjaardagspartijtjes, etc.
En in één keer werd het stil.
In één keer werd het stil. Nou, dit is een van onze escape rooms. Nou, zoals je ziet, leeg. Normaal hangt deze wand vol met gasten, nu hang ik hier maar. Dit is een van onze feestzalen. Normaal goed voor 100 man, nu niks.
Ja, dat was dus even terugschakelen. De wereld stond even stil, maar je bent dus, zoals we al zagen aan het begin, niet bij de pakken neer gaan zitten, hè?
Nou, in het begin is wel even paniek. Vervolgens woede, teleurstelling en uiteindelijk duurt het even, maar dan krijg je acceptatie. En vanuit de acceptatie kunnen we een beetje creatief worden. Zoals bijvoorbeeld de Kioti, daar is een mooi voorbeeld van. Andere mogelijkheden zijn escape puzzles en een autosterrit die we straks eind november gaan aanbieden. Als mensen dan niet hier mogen komen, ja, dan proberen we toch wat activiteiten met de mensen thuis te brengen.
Welke tips zou jij andere ondernemers mee willen geven?
Zoek even na bij jezelf van of je die fases doorlopen hebt, van paniek, woede, teleurstelling en vervolgens acceptatie. Als je continu aan het vechten blijft, blijf je nooit openstaan voor creatief denken. En samenwerking zoeken met de anderen die in hetzelfde schuitje zitten.